All right, this is part 3 of how I healed my trauma. And if you are arriving on this video and you haven't watched part 1 and 2, this might feel, like it's not making a whole lot of sense to you. You're of course welcome to watch, but if you want to get caught up, we're going to link to part 1 and part 2 below this video. And if you haven't actually watched my trauma story, you can do that by clicking the link below. We'll link to that one as well. So 3 videos that we're linking to in case it's useful to you to make sense of what I'm talking about in this part 3. So we are starting from where I left off before. Today in this video, I was 31, 32-ish, had moved to Boulder, Colorado, healed my knees, started running and hiking again, and my world was expanding, right, instead of shrinking. So it from 17 to 24 really shrunk it, and then I started expanding it, and it felt really expansive by this point, and I didn't totally feel okay still. Like there was still some stuff bubbling just under the surface. Like it was right there getting my attention during this time. And the way it really got my attention, it wasn't like, excuse me, hi, you still have stuff to heal. Could you please go do that? It's not really how this works for any of us. So the reason I'm pointing that out is because I think a lot of the time, maybe we think healing trauma should be obvious. Like when you heal trauma, you're healing it because you're actually talking about looking at or feeling your trauma. And I just don't think that's true, personally. I think we can heal our traumas by embracing whatever is happening in our lives right now. So if there's unhealed trauma, I 100% guarantee you it's going to be getting your attention daily. The only thing to think about is whether or not you're actually engaging with it, right? So if you want to engage with it, it's always there for you, I believe. But it'll get your attention, or, I'll just speak for myself. It gets my attention in like ways that aren't like obviously related to my trauma per se. And what was happening at this time is I hadn't dated in like 4 years. But when I arrived in Boulder, and I felt like a really different person. Like I felt, like somewhat healed, more free, ready to actually be in a relationship. I'm 31 instead of 26 when my last relationship ended. Big consciousness difference there too, right? And I remember I was in a women's group, women's circle, and I remember telling them that I knew I wanted to date maybe, I thought I should, but I couldn't even get in touch with the desire to date. Like it felt so out of touch for me. And looking back, I think if I had been able to articulate it better at the time, I would have said, I don't believe dating is for me this lifetime, or it's out of my, like, it's not for you, Alicia. Like life is saying, like you can have whatever else you want in life, but dating, love, intimacy, relationship, that's not for you. That's not really how I worded it at the time, but it just felt really out of reach. And I wanted to bridge that distance. So I did start dating here and there, and what actually ended up happening in 2012, I believe, I joined Match.com. And at the time, online dating was still like really, like not commonly accepted, kind of ridiculed a little. What? You're doing online dating? You can't meet someone in real life? Which is like crazy, right? We're in 2019, only 7 years later, and like it's the only way. And people are like, what? You met in real life? So just kind of interesting, but I was really aware of the stigma. And yet I didn't really know how else to go about dating. It felt like an easy way to overcome this thing that I didn't know how to overcome. And I ended up telling my Facebook friends at the time in 2012, like, so online dating kind of has a stigma. I'd like to break the stigma. And just so you all know, I joined Match.com and I have a date on Friday. And of course, this was like at the time of Facebook when it was primarily personal, like primarily used for personal sharing and keeping up with your friends and your family, right? I don't even remember if like ads were a thing back then. And what happened was like not anything I planned or expected, but people, my Facebook friends, became really invested in finding out what happened on this date. And I don't even remember who I met that first time on that date, but I know it didn't turn into anything. But what happened is I started describing my dates on Facebook. And it became like a blog on Facebook. And it's like hilarious to me now because at the time it really was just like, hey guys, like, hey friends, like people I know, like here's how the date went. And I would give the guys fictitious names, never reveal anything personal about them, but I would describe the date, describe how I felt, whether I liked them, didn't like them, wanted a second date or didn't. And it became kind of like a thing. Like people started telling me they felt addicted to my dating life and they couldn't wait to find out what happened next, which is really weird. And the reason I'm sharing this is because something interesting happened here that actually helped me heal my trauma, or pieces of it, which is, I've already mentioned in the story that writing is big for me and I love writing and writing has helped me heal. And now suddenly I'm writing, but it's public. It's like a public journal about my dating life. And something happens, at least in me, when I'm writing something that I know is going to be public. I start to imagine the reader, somebody on the other side, reading what I'm writing. And then I get a feeling overall of how they're going to perceive me. Maybe I'm completely inaccurate, but what I know for sure is at least happening here is that I'm perceiving myself as an objective now, an objective person, objective witness, like the viewer. So I'm having a relationship with myself around dating and all of the emotions that it's bringing up and the insecurities that I'm facing through dating, but I'm doing it through the lens of an objective witness, some Facebook friend of mine that I don't even know, that I went to IIN with or whatever. And this was like, I think it actually like did something profound for my consciousness in really helping me tap into this observer space and start seeing myself from a psychological and emotional perspective with a lot of objectivity, while also allowing myself to be subjective. So I was allowing myself to have the emotions I was having, but then I would actually, like in my writing, take myself out of the subjective and talk about what I'm seeing in myself. So really interesting thing to do. Whether, it is not for everybody to do this publicly. I've now found out I'm an extrovert, not an introvert, and I'll talk about that late in this, episode 3 here. But writing, I think, again, hugely important to my healing, and I would not be here if I hadn't been a writer. At this time, I ended up like in one 6-month relationship that didn't quite pan out. Like it, still totally respect the guy. Like we're Facebook friends. We climbed a bunch of mountains together. He now is married, has a family, and it just wasn't the right relationship for us. And then after that, I ended up, and I was kind of blogging a little bit this whole time. And then after that, I ended up in another relationship. And this is the one that I really want to talk about, because it was pivotal to my healing. And I met, I think I went from Match.com to OkCupid. Anyway, still doing online dating, and met up with this guy. And let's see, maybe I should give him a fictitious name here. I'm thinking out loud right now because I don't just want to say the guy. Maybe I'll call him Z for short. I have no idea why I picked that. But it's easy. So I am going to go meet Z for our first date, which is simply, I think maybe like coffee and a walk. Like I would always do my first dates like really casual, like nothing long, nothing committing in case I needed to bail. And I also was 100% committing to upfront in these dates saying, you know what, I don't think we're a match. Thanks for coming out, but I don't want a second date. If I was feeling that, I was practicing a lot of like bold conversation and communication, which was really awesome for me. So anyway, I met him, we went on a walk and got coffee, I think, and I came home. Honestly, like I actually don't remember a whole lot from that walk, other than what I'm about to tell you, which I think is really interesting. Otherwise, I would describe it for you. But I came home and told one of my roommates and good friends, Paul, that, so he was always kind of following my dating and wanted to know how it was going. So I told Paul, I am pretty sure I'm going to wake up 6 months from now going, what the fuck just happened? But I also don't think I can stop it. And I have no idea how I knew that from this first date. It's kind of similar to how I knew when I first met the other man when I was 24, that like this was not gonna end, you know, it wasn't good, and yet I couldn't stop myself. And herein lies, I think, a piece or a key to my healing that may or may not be useful to you, and probably isn't right. This approach probably isn't right for everybody. However, if it is right for you, I hope this message gets to you. I hope you end up watching this video, because there aren't very many places where people are talking about this or giving permission to do this for healing. For me, what has always made the most sense is whatever's happening in my life with the people in my life or the circumstances that are giving me a feeling of like compulsion, addiction, like intense, you know, something that just feels like, you know, it has that kind of like hooky feeling in it that is wrapped up in trauma feelings for me. I would be like, let's go. All right. Like, this might fucking suck, but I got to do it. That's the only way through. And so even though I knew this relationship may not end well or be a good relationship, there was obviously something here for me that I had to find out about. And I'm so glad I said yes to that, because without this 6-month relationship that I'm about to get into in my story, I would not have healed this deeper piece that I had to heal to find ultimate freedom. So up until this point in my life, I'm 33 years old. Up until this point in my life, I have considered myself an introvert, needing a lot of alone time, very socially anxious, a lot of digestive issues, a lot of trepidation about going out and being around people. I just kind of thought like it's my personality. I'm an introvert, I have social anxiety or whatever. So I want to give you that context, because at 33, that's still who I think I am, even though I'm hiking and running again and I feel more free. So there's this other like internal piece, and I meet Z and we go on this date, and it ends up like, it's one of those things where, we're texting each other like every day, and then end up very, very quickly falling in love. And I kind of put it in quotations because I know now it's not really love. But there's a compulsion there on both sides, and we can't, keep away from each other. And there were some clues up front for me that something was like not I don't even know how to word it, like not transparent, not authentic, not there, like my spidey senses were up, basically, is the best way to put it. But I didn't know why. But this dynamic of my spidey senses going on alert and not knowing why was what drew me. It was the thing that I had to find out about with him. And he did share with me right away that there were some mental health issues that he was facing. However, he did not disclose the full extent to me. And I'm, to this day, unsure what is true and what is not true regarding his mental health. But we're together for 6 months, and during that time, very little happens that's bad, that I can point to. It's except this spidey sense of mine that just senses that something is off. And like I said, a few things kind of happened. Like in the beginning of our relationship, he offered to go learn how to, at this time I was still calling what I do Rossiter. He offered to go learn how to do Rossiter. I offered to help pay for it, and he said, "Oh no, don't worry about it." And then I found out quite quickly after that he had no money. He was like really broke. He was working for $10 an hour. So I have no idea how he got that money. And he ended up moving in with me because he had no money and got kicked out of the place he was living. You can kind of get a feel for the type of relationship this was, I think, with those few clues. And money went missing from my wallet, right, at this time. And I asked him about it. "Oh, no, do you need money from me?" is what he said. "I'm sorry." Anyway, that little synopsis, I think, can give you a clue to what is kind of going on here. And yet nothing was outwardly visibly wrong. There was no violence, there was no jealousy, there was not a lot of fighting. There was some discord for sure. And then slowly it started to become quite apparent that something in him wasn't right, and he was admitting it and talking about it with me in tiny pieces. And ultimately I came to find out, or he at least told me, and I have no idea, like I said, if this is actually true, but he told me that he was schizophrenic and was having a lot of hallucinations, and it was affecting our relationship. And ultimately we broke up together. Like it was a mutual decision that we shouldn't be together. And yet there was a lot of love here. And I'm going to maybe put it in quotations. Like there were a lot of emotions here. There was a lot of intimacy that had been created. And it felt very, very, very young. Like when I look back on it now, it's like really young love, childlike almost. And what I believe probably happened, looking back on it, is both of our traumatized child selves fell in love with our traumatized child selves. But it was not an adult relationship whatsoever. And it was an excruciating breakup for me on a heart perspective, because I felt like I was abandoning or breaking up with or leaving like a best friend, like a child best friend, or like I don't know if this is making any sense to you guys. It just, I didn't want to be breaking up with him because there was a lot of emotion there, and it also felt like the right thing to do, and I was completely committed to it. So I wasn't waffling. It was absolutely the right thing to do. And he felt similarly. There was emotion there, whatever. And then something occurred. These details feel really important to me, so thanks for bearing with me on this story. I think like the day we fully broke up, or like he got the last of his things from my place or whatever, before this we had been Facebook friends. When we kind of were talking, like actually breaking up, but he hadn't moved out fully yet, he unfriended me and blocked me on Facebook, which I found kind of hurtful, but whatever. And it's amazing what these things like can trigger in us, right? Or metaphorically mean to us, the meaning we assign to it. And then after he got the last of his things from my house and left for good, essentially, and we were agreeing not to have a lot of contact, he did something that felt like a huge betrayal to me. And please understand that this is like my psychology getting triggered, like these deep subconscious patterns are rising to the surface that have nothing to do with him and yet are getting triggered by this person's behavior. And so it might seem out of proportion, but I think this is often how it goes. So this again is kind of like my invitation to you, if you feel up to it in yourself, to use your life curriculum to heal. Like if you can be with your own bodily sensations and emotions and psyche through some of what is getting triggered, even if it seems completely illogical, out of proportion, and insane sounding or feeling, I believe it can be really healing. So he unblocked me on Facebook this day that he got his things and left. And we had kind of made an agreement, like he had told me, I think I need to be single for a while. And I was like, wow, good for you. That's awesome. Like, I think that's what you need to do. When you feel, ready, or you've looked at some stuff, maybe we can talk. Like, I still care about you, is one of those types of breakups and conversations. And he unblocked me on Facebook and then posted a picture of him on a date a week prior, something like that. And actually marked himself in a relationship with somebody on Facebook. So he unblocked me so that I would see it, obviously. And it triggered in me this intense wave of psychological trauma rising to the surface. And I immediately felt like, I just felt hit by a bus of disbelief and shock. Even though I probably shouldn't have. And ironically, it was exactly 6 months after I had said, I think I'm going to wake up 6 months from now going, what the fuck just happened? So I'm seeing this, and what's happening in my body suddenly is like a lot of shaking and a lot of anger and a lot of shock. And then what starts to happen in my own psyche that evening, is a mantra that suddenly I was remembering saying that to Paul 6 months prior. And in that moment, wishing I had listened to myself. And then getting really mad at myself for not listening to myself. And I'm having to gloss over other details of the story because it would get really freaking long. So just know that other things kind of led up, to all of this as well. But the mantra that entered my head is, I will never not trust myself again. I will never not trust myself again. I will never not trust myself again. And it ended up, I was home with two of my friends, Jess and Paul. They were aware of what's going on. They were trying to comfort me and be there for me. And they thought maybe it would be a good idea to put on a movie together and try to distract from what was happening. And so this movie is playing, and we're kind of all lying there on the couch or the floor or whatever, trying to watch this movie. And inside, I'm not at all watching the movie. I'm watching my own movie in my own psyche, in my own head, and this mantra keeps repeating, and suddenly I get flooded with the sensation of I might go insane. I had no conscious awareness to have the words at the time, I think I'm having a psychotic break, but looking back, I think I came very close to it. And I'm sitting there on the couch, rocking, holding myself, rocking back and forth, trying to watch this movie, mentally, I will never not trust myself again. I will never not trust myself again. And then very suddenly, out of seemingly nowhere in my psyche, this movie plays in my mind, and I am 13 years old again. And I felt like a 13-year-old in that moment. I'm 13 and I'm at the neighbor's house when this whole thing starts, and it starts to feel wrong, and my spidey senses are getting my attention that something is wrong. You need to pay attention here. And in this movie, my mind is playing in that moment, instead of, sitting there on this 30-year-old's couch, drinking Dr. Pepper and letting him tell me I'm pretty, I run home to my dad and run into his arms, and he envelops me in this giant bear hug, and I collapse and just start bawling. And in that moment on the couch, I started just weeping, like hysterically crying. Like I've never cried like that in my entire life. And I just suddenly felt 13. And I probably looked like I was a teenager. I was probably crying very much like a teenager might in that moment, and just having this visceral feeling of my dad holding me, and suddenly like, I don't know, I was just flooded with this feeling of like some part of me finally got to express itself the way it wanted to, and got to be heard the way it wanted to, even if it was a movie in my own mind. Because I know that that's not how my dad would have received me if I had ran home. Not the way things happened in our family. Not because he's a horrible person or not capable of that. I actually think that if a few other things hadn't occurred the way they had in my family, that probably would have been available to me. But it wasn't. And this particular piece of my trauma healing, I think, feels so critical, because there's a lot of talk about like inner child work, and I think it's probably really useful. But this was like, I allowed myself to have a near psychotic break, and in allowing it, what actually occurred is like a reorganization of my nervous system around my own trauma, and the story I'd been telling myself. And I got to, as I just said, express a part of myself that wanted to be someone who asks for help. I just had nowhere to go. Like, I know that now. Like it would not have gone over well with my parents if I had gone home and said that. I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think kids are wrong. I think we all have very, very good instincts. And I believe, based on knowing my parents, and they're not malicious, horrible people, but due to their own traumatic past that maybe they hadn't healed, they wouldn't have been able to just be with my pain and comfort me the way I needed to be comforted. I think I would have been shamed and blamed and gotten in trouble. So, yeah, just taking a breath. For me, this moment was like a God moment. I've had, I don't know, like a few of moments in my life that I might call like a God moment, of like a complete rupturing of present reality and entering some kind of alternate reality in which I get to see the totality of things, or feel the totality of things that are illogical and yet make sense in the part of reality that is illogical. Because I believe there actually is a part of our human reality that doesn't make logical sense, or at least not to our modern logical brains. And another piece that I want to talk about here is this moment for me initiated a 6-week panic attack that I now know, in hindsight, was 100% crucial to my healing. And this particular piece I want to talk about because I think there's a narrative out there that most therapists abide by, most people abide by, I don't see anybody really talking about what I want to talk about here, which is that there's an innate wisdom in our instincts and our bodies, and sometimes what's happening might feel really fucking scary, and it might be the very thing you need to do to free yourself, like allow a panic attack to play itself out. And I want to be super clear here that I am not advocating that you go do that, because I don't know what your inner resources are like. I just want to start having conversations about this because I don't see it happening anywhere else. And I actually think there are millions of you out there that probably are a little like me, or maybe a lot like me, and you do have the internal resources. It's just no one's given you permission to do these sorts of things, because giving yourself permission to have a 6-week panic attack sounds pretty fucked up, right? Like, so every therapist I've ever told that that this has happened to, whether I'm actually like in therapy with them or not, I have therapist friends, it just thinks like, well, Alicia, I don't know that you have to do it that way. And my response is, I absolutely had to do it that way. I did. Maybe other people don't. But I needed to allow this process to have its completion, like to complete itself in my nervous system. And what I know now is that by allowing myself to have a 6-week panic attack, starting the moment I thought I might have a psychotic break, because it started in that moment and never stopped for 6 weeks, I allowed my body to move out of my nervous system all the trauma I had been containing and holding inside of me since I was 13. So for 20 years, this overwhelming panic is in my body because of what happened, because I didn't get to complete a fight or flight response at age 13. Instead, I had to like ignore it and operate on top of it and figure out how to deal with what was happening without allowing those natural instincts to have their say, right? Because the body is going to try to protect you. It's going to want to go into fight or flight mode when it knows you're in danger. And my body knew I was in danger. Like, I knew I was in danger. I just didn't know how to get help. I didn't think that there was anywhere I could go. So I'm 33. I just had this breakup, right? And see this, thing on Facebook, which feels like such a betrayal. And to be clear, it felt like I thought I knew him and ultimately realized I didn't. And the reason this feels really important, and the reason I'm talking about this in relation to my trauma, is because this experience and what I did to unpack it, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, or process it if you want to use that language, helped me understand that most of my trauma was psychological. I had been operating under the assumption for quite a while that most of my trauma was emotional or sexual. And it absolutely wasn't. It was in my psyche. It was definitely, a psyche thing. And the reason is, now it makes so much sense, is when all of this happened, when I was 13, I just turned 13. So literally like a month before I met this 30-year-old, I was 12. So like, I'm so young. And when this happened, there was a 6-month period of messing with my psyche and confusing my psyche and, like using what was happening in my life and in my family to turn me against my parents and against myself. And against even my friends and people my age. So I felt like I had nowhere to go when he finally decided to, do something that most kids know a 30-year-old shouldn't do. And so that piece for me was like the final thing that unlocked lasting healing for me. And it was the most important piece, because if we don't trust ourselves, and in doing so learn who and who not to trust out there in the world, I believe healing isn't complete. We're not going to feel at home in our body if we don't trust ourselves. And even though I had all this freedom and I was hiking and running again, I still didn't trust myself, I had mentioned that before this or after that first date. And it became super clear to me then that I was going to trust myself from that moment on. And I did make a pact with myself and with my body that I will always trust you from now on. And I want to bring in another piece here, which again is writing. So through my relationship with Z, who I'm calling Z, I was blogging about our relationship. I had been blogging about dating prior to meeting him. He gave me permission to blog about our relationship. And at this time, it occurred to me that my trauma, my unhealed trauma, was impacting our relationship. And he wasn't necessarily telling me his unprocessed trauma was impacting our relationship too. He had some mental health issues that were definitely impacting our relationship. But it came to my attention that maybe I should write about it. And I foreshadowed doing so on my blog. And at this time, I was off of Facebook. I had a blog where I was doing this writing. And I told my readers that I was going to tell my trauma story, and how it was impacting my relationship with Z. And it was literally like at that time that he and I ended up breaking up. So I didn't quite get to do that story in the context of our relationship. However, it was very much alive for me in our breakup, as you no doubt can see. And so I really wanted to write about it. Writing had been the thing that had helped me heal so much in the past, and it felt really right to me to write about it. And I had a readership, and they were kind of following along and eager to hear about it. And my family freaked the fuck out because my trauma involves them. So I got a phone call before my blog was going to go, the first blog in the series about my trauma was going to go out, and it was my family all on the phone with me doing an intervention to try to get me to stop publishing it, to not hit publish and make it public. And this was in 2014, January of 2014 when this happened. And I stuck to my guns, and I felt instinctively certain I had to write about it to heal. And nothing my family said was going to change my mind about that. I did try to enter conversations with them about my trauma and about the past so we could heal it together. I tried to have some facilitated conversations with them, with therapists or people in my community that I knew did like facilitated conversations like this that were hard. My family rejected that idea. They didn't think we needed outside help. And, it's like, probably a familiar narrative to a lot of you, either in your family or people where it's like you don't air the family's dirty laundry publicly. This is a family matter. And, that was kind of what was happening. I was definitely threatened by one or more family members, not with anything like, it was basically like, you do this and I'll never talk to you again. So it wasn't like threatening my safety or anything like that. And I was like, okay, like, I guess I can live with that because this is important to me. And I trust that I'm going to honor the story of our family and not just, I don't know, write this in a way that it makes me look a certain way and everyone, I don't know. I was hunting for the truth. Like, the truth has always felt so important to me. And so I wrote my story publicly for the first time, and in writing it, processed it and got to see again from like a witness perspective what had actually happened. And this helped me heal again. So you can see a theme here that writing for me has helped me heal a lot. And I've actually seen literature now that's documented in books like The Body Keeps the Score on just how important writing is for people who have serious trauma to heal. So I did it instinctively, and I'm really grateful. But what ended up happening through this time is I ended up not talking to my brother for 6 months, barely made it to staying in connection with my dad, and my mom definitely tried to show up for me during this time to understand where I was coming from and why I wanted to do this publicly and what my perspectives on the past were. So many conversations with my mom through this time, which I'm grateful for. And that 6-week panic attack, this is how it manifested. It was like, just the thought of even figuring out what to eat felt so anxiety producing that I ate I would cook a pizza, an at-home pizza, ahead of time, and then I just figured out for myself, as long as this panic attack is going, I'm gonna eat 2 pieces of pizza for breakfast and 2 for dinner, and that's all I'm gonna eat, because I just couldn't, like, the thought of actually having to decide what to eat sent me into a near, like, even more panic than I was already feeling. I minimized my client load at the time. I had my private practice, and I sought quite a bit of help. I entered a relationship practice group where we got to practice sharing our truths and speaking and getting reflected and heard, and getting outside feedback on how we're showing up. That was very instrumental for me and very useful. I had a couple of sessions of astrology and a shamanic chakra clearing session, which may not have done anything, but I was trying everything at this time to not numb, dissociate, or distract from what was happening or eliminate it, but to try to move it through. That was my intention, was to try to understand what was happening and move it through me so that I never had to do it again. And I woke up from this 6-week panic attack, I think it was, I don't know if it was one day that it just happened, but it was probably a period of 1 week where by the end of this week of wow, I no longer feel panic, I suddenly had more energy than I knew what to do with. I was bouncing off the walls. I felt totally free of so much of what had kept me feeling trapped in my body before. I felt haunted for so many years, and that feeling was completely gone. And my private practice just exploded. My calendar filled up. I realized I was an extrovert, not an introvert. My digestion issues completely cleared. My anxiety was completely gone. So I had anxiety prior to this. I no longer had social anxiety. I felt like a social butterfly. I wanted to go out. I wanted to talk to people. And I was just astonished by this change in myself. I wasn't expecting that. It wasn't something I set out to change. It just changed by allowing myself to have this completion process. And that summer, I ended up taking a 30-day trip by myself to camp throughout Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah, and hike my heart out and go just enjoy life and feel this freedom in the way that I love best, which is being in the outdoors. And I was actually terrified to be out there by myself. I'd never camped by myself. And I was going to some pretty wild places, but I had this moment where I think I'd been hiking already for 2 weeks maybe. And I was in Wyoming in the Grand Tetons. I was by myself out there in the middle of nowhere on some trail. It was absolutely beautiful. I could feel grizzlies out there somewhere. I could totally feel them. And I was just hiking my heart out and I felt jubilant, and suddenly it hit me. It hit me with full conscious thought instead of just kind of going about my life at the time that, oh my God, that I'm free. I feel so free and I'm not afraid anymore. That was the number one thing that hit me, is it's gone. The fear that I had is gone. I had lived with a fear for so long that I was afraid of pain. I was afraid of, because I thought it would swallow me and take me whole and keep me in an underworld, away from all joy and happiness if I paid it heed, right? And I was afraid I would end up, feeling trapped for the rest of my life. I was afraid I would never feel free or happy or even at peace. There was a time in my life that I would have traded any promise of happiness or joy or love or relationships or fulfillment for peace. If you would have told me at age 20, 21, 22, 24, 26, Alicia, if you're willing to give up any hope of love, intimacy, joy, fulfillment, in exchange for feeling at peace in your body and your mind, would you take it? I would have said, hell yes. Because, maybe not, but I'm just trying to paint a picture of how dire it felt to me, that I really wondered if I would ever know what it feels like to be at peace, let alone happy. And suddenly I feel free and joyous, and I'm out there hiking by myself, and I have absolutely zero pain. Or zero fear of pain, any pain, my pain, your pain, any pain. I wasn't afraid that if my knee pain came back, didn't matter. I knew how to help it. I knew, I had made pain my friend to such a degree that nothing it could ever do from that moment on would ever scare me. And it's been true so far. There's other pains that we have in life that I'm currently feeling, which is like maybe on the, poisoning illness side of things, or something going on more internally that's not exactly pain, not like an injury or emotional pain. And that's kind of the next level, I guess. But pain no longer scared me. So I was 33, about to turn 34, and felt really complete with it. And I have felt pretty complete with it since. I suddenly, like I said, had more energy than I knew what to do with. That's when I started mobility mastery. That's when I started working my butt off. I had always had a fear of success before that. And now I know it was actually a fear of overwhelm, like overwhelming an already full nervous system to the degree to such a degree that I might get sick or burn out or whatever. And since that time, I have definitely encountered some patterns that have remained present with me, but I would definitely argue that the dominant part of my trauma is complete. It's healed. And it happened, when I was 33, 34, that completion of it. I took care of the emotional, I took care of the physical, I took care of the psyche and the soul and the unconscious stuff. And now whatever's left, like whatever's here, because I don't think it's like, oh, you're done and the rest of your life is going to be 100%, challenge free. That's not at all what I think. I do think we carry a lot of the patterns from the past forward, even if we've healed the emotional, the physical, and the psychic or psyche aspects. And I'm definitely looking at some of those patterns now and have been, but I no longer feel trapped. I no longer feel any of the emotional turmoil. I feel pretty conscious of it all. And I'm working on making those patterns more conscious so I can create my life out of my own free will and freedom than those automations, right? And those programs that got created due to my trauma. So, that is the synopsis of how I healed my trauma. And completes part 3, which is the end of my trauma healing story. And I guess here at the end, I want to maybe just recap a few of the themes for me that feel a little unique about how I healed my trauma. And I'm not saying I think I'm the only one. I think there's probably a lot of people out there that have done something similar to me. They're maybe just not publishing it on YouTube either, or maybe I haven't found them, I don't know. But it's not a narrative that I hear that often. So for me, writing, obviously, huge to my healing. I shudder to think of where I would be if I hadn't picked up a pen and a journal. I mean, like I said, I have probably like 3 boxes full of them, and I haven't been journaling. Like, I stopped journaling at 33. Like, I feel done with it. Instead, I've now turned my focus to coming on YouTube and writing blog posts and writing other things. And I have mentioned and written about my trauma story here and there, but not to heal it, more to address it if it's a nervous system pattern rearing its head related to that, or otherwise. So writing, also cultivating the capacity to be with a lot of discomfort, pain, uncertainty, fear, all the things that we kind of label bad in our society. I turned towards starting when I was 24, to varying degrees to the best of my abilities. So I was turning towards my emotional pain. I was turning towards my physical pain, confronting it, lovingly, but looking at it, like turning towards myself and actually looking at what was here and allowing my body to speak, allowing my psyche to speak, allowing my emotions to speak, and allowing each of those pieces their full process. I believe we're living in a time right now where we are terrified of pain. We are terrified of discomfort. We are terrified of uncertainty. And it's costing us our freedom. I 100% believe that. It was costing me mine, and it took me a long time to crawl out of those holes and earn my freedom. But if you've been waiting for a permission slip to allow yourself to fully express your emotions, your or look at what's happening in your body, or, your psyche, or whether it's journaling or blogging about it publicly, or confronting your family, or whatever that thing is, this is your permission slip. You don't need one, but if you did, I would want to give it to you. If you feel like you have the capacity to hold yourself in that, then you can do anything. You can do anything. You can heal anything. You don't even need a trauma therapist per se. And some people are going to probably hate on me for saying that, but I believe it to be true. I've lived it. And I guess the other theme for me, the main theme, would be using your life curriculum as the classroom, as the trauma therapy office for yourself. Whatever's happening in your life, if you have unresolved trauma, it's going to get your attention in some way. And it may not obviously have to do with your trauma, but if you're willing to turn towards what is getting your attention, I promise you, if you have unhealed trauma, there's a relationship there, and you're going to start healing your trauma when you start healing or turning towards your digestive stuff, or your anxiety, or your relationships, or your family relationships. So that's, those are the main things that I hope you find useful. But if there are other little nuggets or things, or even if it's just oh my gosh, someone else going through it, then I would hope, that's there for you as well. If you've watched all 3 of these, thank you so much for watching. I really pray that these be useful to you every time I sit down and talk about my story. I'm not doing this to heal myself. I've healed myself. I'm hoping that we can share more of our stories out there, because I want to see, if you're watching this and you do have trauma, I want to see you sharing your trauma story. I want to see more of us sharing our trauma stories, so we can all know what it looks like to be human, and to go through this, because so much of the time we only get it, after, and it's a pretty polished bullet point list of things people did to heal trauma, but not I've always longed for the nitty gritty, wanted to interrupt the interview that I'm watching on YouTube or whatever and be no, but what was it really like for you? Or what did you really do? Or, okay, yeah, you did the gratitude thing, but was it really that simple? So I always longed for more details from people and more intimacy in the telling of it. And I hope by allowing myself to do that it's useful for you. So thank you so much for watching, and please share your comments below, and any takeaways you have from these stories of how I healed my trauma. And if you have any questions for me about how I healed my trauma, or, trauma healing, I'm not a trauma therapist. I'm not an expert on it. But maybe I have a perspective that could be useful to you, then please share that below, and I will either answer you in the comments or perhaps film a video that could be useful to you here on the channel. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, thank you, and I'll see you soon.